Hello, this is Josh Belk with the Belk on Business podcast. Today we're going to hop into a topic, and we've talked about this, I guess, probably a few different times in different ways in regards to our mindset as it relates to business and tax planning. And so we're gonna talk a little bit about that today. I spoke at a conference this past week, and usually when I go and I speak on any sort of topic, generally many times I get asked to talk about tax or whatever the case may be. Usually I'll start with talking about the mindset as it relates to the topic that we're talking about, and for a number of different reasons. And I think that one thing in being an advisor for clients, and I think if you were talking to your attorney or talking to any of your advisors, they may tell you a similar type of a thing, and that many times as business owners, we end up making our decisions in a vacuum. So we end up going through and we're kind of looking, okay, this is the matter of urgency in front of us and we want to address it, and sometimes don't take a kind of a broader or holistic view into what exactly is going on. In the world of tax, and being primarily kind of a tax and business advisor with our clients, I began to really learn this throughout the years, that many times there really isn't true planning. It kind of ends up being a knee-jerk reaction. They end up getting their tax return or some sort of an analysis, and they're like, kind of in these situations, it's like, oh, what are we going to do now? I have this exposure. I didn't plan for it. I have these other things going on. What do I do now? And I think it's extremely important that for those of us who are business owners, that we really take a broader view and look at how each one of the decisions interact with each other. I'm gonna use tax a little bit more as kind of the pinpoint in regards to their foundation that we kind of build this particular conversation on. So any sort of planning process really should not be made in a vacuum. You think about tax planning. Many times that conversation ends up being too late. So it becomes too late to do many things inside of the business or personally to be able to address any sort of tax exposure. We think about the cash flow planning. It's another area that we work with or have conversations with our clients a lot on, and that's cash flow planning. And many times a business kind of goes through and they end up they almost run their business paycheck by paycheck, or week by week, or month by month. I hope I have enough to cover payroll on this particular month, and so they're not bringing in all the different elements. So when it comes to cash flow planning, they run into a situation where they end up taking on really high debt, a really high interest debt, in order to try to keep their doors open. They're very crippling to a business. So they get to a point they can't manage the debt load, et cetera. For other business, sometimes it becomes a development planning issue. So investing in people, trying to find the right type of people, developing and working, investing in the culture inside the business. And then they run into a situation where they fail to do it. They were just kind of like, okay, well, I'm just going to hire people, and they're just going to kind of do their job, and they're not being invested in. You're not trying to find the best people. You're not hiring, via meritocracy. You may be using some other way to help and develop, try to help and develop people, which are ineffective methods. And then you end up running into a position where your culture stinks. You have the wrong people inside of your business, and I think we've seen this on the macro, even in our political environment, that these types of decisions made in a poor way and in a siloed way really can be destructive to a business, can be destructive to a government. It can be and can be destructive even in your family life. So all planning should begin with keeping the mission or purpose, the kind of that overused term, the why, as preeminent. So that really should be the basis point of how we go about making our decisions. What is the purpose? So every bit of cash that you deploy, every decision that you make inside of your business really should be filtered through that. And that really starts at the planning process. So when you build out that planning process, does everything within this plan, does it get us to the point where we need to be? That may mean that you pay more in taxes. That may mean that you do some things that you may not prefer to do, and things that maybe you'd like to do, and you kind of sacrifice those at the altar of making sure that you get to the point of getting that business to where it needs to be, that you're serving your people in the way they need to be served, both inside the business and also your clientele or your customer base. So to make a business decision without considering other variables will generally result in the wrong decision being made, almost categorically ends up being with the wrong decision being made, because you put your cash in the wrong place. You've hired the wrong people, whatever the case may be, because you were using some factor that wasn't one that got you to it's not pushing you toward any sort of goals, that mission, that purpose that you have inside of your business. To make a decision only because of tax reduction, for example, you could end up putting money in a place that reduces tax one year but creates complications in further years, meaning that now all of a sudden you don't have the cash to be able to manage debt. You don't have the cash to be able to invest in your people or your product or your service. Okay, or even worse, it ends up just being dollars and cents. So you didn't take in the other factors that come into play. So just because it might reduce your tax exposure by 25% in one year does not mean that it's going to, in the long run, end up saving you 25%. Okay, so because you have to look at opportunity cost, you have to look at other areas. So other considerations need to be made. Debt cash flow management. Okay, so if I'm going through and I'm taking $100,000 to deploy into an asset that I receive, $15,000 in tax write-off, but I have $100,000 in debt. Okay, with a 10% interest rate, do the math. Okay, the amount that I saved in taxes, I'm going to pay in interest over the next year and a half or so. Okay, so those types of variables need to be put into consideration. I may take a podcast to maybe try to draw this out and try to give those numbers. So many times in conversations with clients, it ends up being, it's just that siloed conversation. Well, if this is going to save me X in taxes, I want to do it. And then trying to get them to the point that we need to take in other variables can be a bit of a hurdle to try to get through in the minds of individuals many times. So does that particular tax reduction strategy, for example, does it make sense if I have to take on debt to pay for it, or I'm not investing in other areas that would truly push my business forward? I may be taking that $100,000 and developing a product or a service that's going to earn me $1 million over the next 10 years. Why in the world would I take the $100,000 to try to save $15,000, $20,000 in taxes? It just does not make sense. Okay. Now I have a slide, and most every time I speak, if I'm speaking on tax, I will put this slide up. And this slide says this: the tax system is built in a way to get taxpayers to act in certain ways by awarding or punishing certain behaviors. So we kind of have to realize that sometimes when it comes to deployment of capital, now this is just isn't in tax. Sometimes I see this sometimes in rooms that there may be somebody up there that sells a product or a service that seems like it'd be something that might be good for the business. But guess what? At that point, you're operating on somebody else's agenda. So when you're going through and you're making decisions solely on tax and tax reduction, essentially you're deploying capital in a way that the government body, for example, the tax agencies want to deploy capital. So they, think of the largest sweeping tax change we had back in 2017. It provided for opportunity zones, for example. And so if you have a heart and you're in real estate to invest in a community, and that's one way of going about doing it, aligned with your mission, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, but if you're throwing money into some other areas, for example, you may be so I own an accounting firm. For me to go out and invest money in some sort of syndication, and it does not align with the purpose of the business, simply just as a tax reduction strategy, and it's going to take away from my ability to manage debt and develop people and develop product, then it becomes a distraction, and it's something we definitely don't want to do. I'm better off paying a little bit more in tax and then being able to deploy that capital where it's essentially going to help the business, help the people, help the service, help the customer more than simply just that tax reduction strategy. So, but you need to be aware as far as whose agenda you're supporting. Just think of in recent years under President Biden's leadership, where we ended up with a law being passed, and this isn't talked about, to where it allows for the Chinese, for example, to be able to have essentially own stock or trade stock, sell stock on our U.S. stock exchange. Okay, so it's something as an individual, I probably don't want to invest in that. Okay, because there is more destructive to our economy. It takes away from jobs inside of our economy. I don't want to be investing in those types of companies. Okay, so if I'm going through and I'm sold on this particular agenda, I need to realize that that if I go through and I deploy capital in a way that, in this case here, that particular law, when that particular law was passed, 'cause it was part of an overall law, and some of it may have had, depending on your paradigm, you may have liked some of it, but you need to realize there may be certain aspects that you didn't like. And so when you're going through and you're deploying capital, kind of be aware that you're not always following, and most of the time you're not following your agenda, but you're following somebody else's agenda. And you need to kind of consider that when you're going through and you're deploying any sort of capital. So does what you're doing, does it align with your core values? Does it align with your purpose, with your mission, with the direction that you're wanting to take your business and take your team, and even in some ways to take your customers as well? So I think back in kind of a story of when it came to tax, that kind of really hit me hard. The first job that I had. And I went through, and I was making, at that point, minimum wage was $3.80. Okay, so we're talking I think right around the early 90s, 90, 91, something like that. And it was before the next change, I think at 91 or 92 when it went up a little bit. But I went through my first job, and I was working. I went and I worked about 30 hours that first week, and I was making $3.80 an hour. And at that point, I mean, $100 was a ton of money. And I did the math in my head. Okay, make $3.80 an hour, 30 hours. I'm gonna have about $110, $115 paycheck. And I was so happy, so then the next week when I finally got the paycheck on that following Friday, I picked it up, and that check was under $100. And I'm like, what? I was kind of upset about it. I understood that, I had to pay taxes and that type of thing. But essentially at that point, I mean, they took like 15, 20% of my paycheck. And I remember going home and talking to my dad. And at that point, my dad ended up having a conversation with me, kind of bringing the awareness that, what, son, part of this money goes to Social Security. And I'm kind of like, well, why didn't these people plan for their own retirement? Why do I have to pay for, these people who are, 60 years older than I am at the time, 50 years older than I am at the time, because they didn't plan? Okay, I didn't understand that. And of course, I think we all kind of understand that if the Social Security system, if we were to do that inside of our business, that would be called a Ponzi scheme, and we would end up in prison, but the government's allowed to do it. So essentially, we were forced to kind of to put our money into this scheme. Same thing with Medicare, these types of things. And then it kind of really brought an awareness to my mind that, I'm putting my money going into federal income tax, state income tax. And so at that point, I'm really making a decision, and kind of really brought awareness to how am I going about handling my money. And so I may not have a whole lot of control in that, except for obviously the political process. But when it came to other areas, it kind of opened my eyes as to, okay, how am I deploying that capital? Does it align with the direction that I'm wanting to go? And now it's, of course, on the individual end, and then now into business is something that we talk about with clients quite often. Just kind of bring that awareness, and then using that as a launching point to how do I go about making our decision, making my decision, or making your decision. So is where we deploy capital aligning with the direction that supports the purpose we have for the business and the people that work with us, and those businesses and those individuals in which we serve. If not, we can find ourselves in a position of misalignment, which from almost a personal end can end up leading to regret and frustration inside of our business. Kind of knowing that we made the wrong decision, and the team around us knows we made the wrong decision. Our customers can look at us and say, you probably made the wrong decision. And that really can kind of create a lot of complications internally for us. And so we need to make sure also we aren't blindly following what others are selling or doing when it comes to any sort of planning. I get these things all the time. They hear a radio ad for some sort of obscure, tax reduction strategy, and hear it over and over again. Oh, well, it must be true. And so it's something that's just purely a scam or a scheme. Going into, it happens many times in rooms. Someone gets up and they're trying to sell some sort of interest in their syndication or in their business, or they have some sort of product or something that may provide tax reduction or some sort of a rate of return, and everybody kind of gets excited because the person in the front of the room or the person on the other side of the radio or TV or social media, they kind of really are phenomenal salespeople, and we want to kind of jump on board. So always step away from that emotion. Many times take 24, 48 hours, step away from it, take the analysis of whether or not that particular deployment of capital truly is going to help you. Not just reduce your tax amount or increase your rate of return, but any sort of decision that I make, does it truly align with the direction that I'm wanting to go? And then I think the last consideration we need to make is, does the planning help to protect the business financially? Okay, so from a cash flow perspective, from an asset protection, something I haven't mentioned a whole lot. Some people go out there and they try to find the cheapest way of setting up an LLC. They don't engage with trying to figure out whether or not this makes the most sense. So they end up siloing this decision, and it ends up costing them. So does the decision that we make, does it help protect our business financially? When it comes to cash flow planning, how should we go about deploying the capital? For example, is debt reduction. That may be more important than a tax reduction strategy. Am I developing my people? Am I developing my any sort of ideas for service or product? Am I investing in my culture? Do I have a savings plan? I think all of these need to take greater importance over tax planning, or need to be part and parcel of your tax planning strategy. And this is true when it comes to cash flow. Once again, all these pieces need to come together. Your asset protection. Do you have a savings plan? All these things need to come together. And you should be sitting down periodically as we begin to. We are now into the second half of this year, and we'll start meeting with clients in the third and fourth quarter and having more of these deep type of conversations with them. And it's something that maybe you want to consider as well, getting those advisors around you, making sure that those plans are in place as we move into the end of 2024 and begin planning for 2025. Once again, this is Josh Belk with the Belk on Business Podcast. Thank you for taking a few moments to listen in today. If you haven't already subscribed, please consider doing so. I'd love to hear any feedback if you have any to offer. Have a wonderful day.